Hello, everybody. We'll be getting started here in just a few minutes. Give everybody a few minutes to see if we have some stragglers coming on.
Nick, was that the sound of you throwing your laptop?
We call that a stairs diagnostic in the business.
Oh no, he's not responding. It might have been a stairs diagnostic. Oh, actually, yeah, Nick just let me know. His computer just rebooted, so he can't use the laptop screen, only external monitor. Not hearing anything, so some technical difficulties. I'm going to pull up. I think I have the latest version of the presentation. I guess we'll find out. So bear with us. Of course, wouldn't be any presentation without some technical difficulties, right?
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
I'll let you pull it up that way. You have your flow for that better.
Sorry about that. Literally, right. I can't even use my laptop screen. I can only use my external monitor. So sorry. Love it. Let's see. I'm gonna pull up this slides real quick. Did you guys put together slides for this as well, Andy, Spencer?
Yeah. There's just a few kind of quick intro slides. I mean, most of it's going to be walking through what we got prepped there, but we got a few slides. Okay. Mostly your housekeeping slides.
Awesome. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Sorry about all the technical difficulty, but I think we have everybody who we're going to get today. So thank you, everyone, for showing up. This is the Adobe Analytics Deep Dive today. A couple of rules and reminders. We're not doing any self-promotion. Don't contact people inside of this meeting without express permission. If you talk beforehand or if you're sending a message and they say, hey, please reach out, then by all means. But this is just, this is for learning purposes. We want to share what we know and everything. And with that, if anything it gets shared in a specific use case or with details, please don't share that again without consent. There could be some proprietary information that seeps into stuff like this. So, just be respectful of everybody and, ask permission before doing anything. This session will be and is being recorded, which, I love given all of my technical issues coming into this. makes it awesome. But at the same time, if you're not comfortable being recorded, please leave now. This will be posted on the YouTube page later, to where anybody can watch this or reference it at any time. Keep up with us. We are a new user group for Adobe Analytics, so please join the user group. That way you get notifications when there's a new one of these. We're not quite ready to do them once a month, but we are trying to do them once every 2-3 months, just to get, it's a new user group. It's a new thing that we're doing inside the champion group. So please join, so you know when we schedule one of these. Like I said, they're not always super consistent. So getting that email is super useful. All right, and then today I am the presenter, or I'm the moderator rather. My name is Nick Walter. I'm a current Adobe champion, and we have Andy and Spencer here from Razorfish today. Andy is a current Adobe champion. Spencer is, he's not a champion yet, but I think he's on his way. He's more than qualified to be one. And both of them, like I said, are from Razorfish, and I will let them take it from there. Just let me know when you want me to change slides, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. So as Nick mentioned, I'm Andy Lunsford, Director of Data Instrumentation at Razorfish, two-time Adobe Analytics Champion. I'm privileged to have been part of quite a few amazing teams that have driven analytics and martech implementations at scale across just the gamut of industries, legal, financial, grocery, PPG, automotive. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Spencer to introduce himself, but just to be preface it, in case his intro is too humble, I'll brag for him. He's an encyclopedic knowledge of the Adobe product suite. And I'm personally really excited for us to walk through what we put together today. So I'm going to hand it over to Spencer real quick to give a couple sentences about himself.
Hi, I'm Spencer Hayden, also Director of Data Instrumentation here at Razorfish. I've been working in the Adobe stack for a very long time. I see plenty of emails with the word Omniture in them, starting out all the way from Adobe Tag Manager into DTM, and then launch to data collection tags. I've also had chances to work in a lot of different things, commerce, automotive, grocery, a lot of the same ones Andy has. Yeah, excited to go over what we've got today.
And if you want to go to the next slide real quick, Nick, we'll kind of go through a brief overview of the agenda. Today's going to be diving a lot into the building blocks of Adobe Launch. We're going to compare these against another commonly used TMS out there that is available for free, GTM or Google Tag Manager. That'll get you up to speed quicker if you experience with ATMS. We'll start with extensions, move to rules, dive into data elements, and spend a little bit of time reviewing hosts. We're also going to kind of walk through some opportunities you have for consent management, and dive into a little bit of the best practices. It'll be peppered throughout, but kind of anything we don't cover into this section about naming conventions, structure of logic. And then the remainder of the time we'll use to walk through the two use cases. But an important note, I want to kind of stress this. It's part of the benefit of this presentation structure and style is it's supposed to be free-form and interactive. So if you're seeing us doing something at any point you'd like us to dive more into during it actively, please let us know. We will dive deeper right then and there. And then if you go to the next slide real quick, Nick, there's some additional links and resources that we can copy paste into the chat. I believe we'll make these slides available later, Nick, correct? Is there a way that we can make these available later for people so they can have them?
I'm sure we can figure that out.
Yeah, so this will be a good kind of resource because we're going to be covering a lot in here, but there is a lot you can cover in Launch, and we're limited in our time together. So these will be a great stepping stone after the presentation if you want to dive into further, more detail inside Launch. But before we dive too much deeper into the tool itself, let's cover where you can actually find it, because I think that's an important thing that's probably a worthwhile start. Let me see. I don't think I have permission to share the screen, Nick. Is that something you can assist with?
Yeah, it should be down there next to participants, down at the very bottom. You're a presenter, so you should have all the same access as I do. As far as I'm aware.
Yeah, it's grayed out. It might be because you are, Nick.
Oh, that could. Well, I'll stop sharing, and then I can always bring it back up.
There we go. That did it. Thank you.
See, room full of smart people here.
There we go. So obviously we're in it right now on my screen, but let's just say, you got to your main login, get experience.adobe.com. This is your organization. So there's two ways we're going to cover it. So the first one is going to be the one most people are familiar with, data collection. And then boom, tags right here. And for the one we'll be looking at today, it's going to be deep dive for Adobe Analytics, tags, data collection. Now, let's say whatever reason you didn't have that saved at your homepage, or you want to look another place, it's also available in AEP. A little bit harder to find here at the sidebar. I don't know why it's, there we go. Mine's being compressed by default. I need to figure out why that's happening. And if you go down to data collection, you can also access here directly from Experience Platform. So if you're in CJA and you're primarily inside the AEP work stream, might be quicker to get there from that way. Otherwise, you can utilize that. The other thing we'll cover is just kind of how we quickly get the embed install script so you can actually install it on a site or a container. And by default, this already had a little bit of configuration done in it for prep for today's call. But your environments, you see this little install package system icon right here. This is where you can get it from your production, development, and staging libraries. By default, you'll get one of each of these for managed by Adobe Host, which we'll dive into more a little bit later. But you will grab the script. This is equivalent to what you would put in for another tag manager system for an install script that you would embed in the head of the site. So that's kind of quickly how those are laid out. And speaking of environments, you might have seen in the publishing view, we have these wonderful things called libraries. I'm going to hand over to Spencer to talk about these, but I would say the most equivalent thing for these is workspaces in GTM. So if you look at GTM and you set up a new workspace, that is kind of the equivalent for a library. I'm going to hand over to Spencer to talk through those.
Yeah, so each of these packages that you put together in Launch's libraries are collections of all of the components that are inside of Adobe Launch. So if you are looking at any one of those, it is a collection of all of the things you have decided go into that library. So that can include all of the components, rules, data elements, and extensions. It is whatever version you have saved into that. So there could be times when you have an object or you're editing a rule and you know that you want to make a change for one library and then you want to go and make additional changes later. Those future changes do not get automatically put in the library unless you again save them to that library. There are certain cases or scenarios where that'll make sense when you're in the tool, but almost always you have whatever version is the most recent in that library, and it starts out in development, and then you can approve and build up into staging, which is these middle two categories, and then finally into production. Everything in production flows backwards into staging, into development, and everything in staging flows back into development. One of the handy things is you have an unlimited number of development environments, which is why this is this long bar on the left-hand side. So there are lots of different best practices around that. Some people have development environments for every part of the site. Some people have development environments for every kind of initiative, every kind of service. You want to establish whatever is going to be best for you and then name your development environments so that people know what they should be looking for or what libraries they should be putting into that development environment. One of the first things you're going to need to put into your launch container is an extension. Extensions are basically toolboxes that Adobe Launch or Adobe Tags is going to bring to the site that allows you a variety of options inside of the tag manager, as well as allows you to immediately access those platforms without having to do a bunch of manual code pasting or timing or things along those lines. You'll see that we have a smattering of them already installed here. They're in the installed tab. So that says when a library is loaded that has these that are installed, you're going to get Adobe Analytics. You're going to get Client Data Layer, ACDL. You're going to get Web SDK here. Core always comes out of the box. That's always going to be there, and that provides some base functionality. We've got the Data Element Assistant here for some data element modification and automation. Experience Cloud ID service. This is going to bring your ECID to the page. And then I've added a third-party tag or third-party extension here that allows you to manage G tag or Google tag, which allows you to do floodlight, AdWords, and the like. Whenever I see a new partner come to the site or someone sends me a request, before I just grab the code snippet they send me and paste it into a rule, I always want to come into the catalog here and see if there is an extension that exists already for that platform. Because I would really much rather have a friendly interface into any of these platforms rather than having to specifically place in a bunch of extra JavaScript or HTML. There isn't always going to be one, but if there is one, it is a significantly easier time rather than having to manually configure. So for one example, let's say someone wanted to bring OneTrust. OneTrust has an extension. So rather than having to paste in the code or have my front end team put it into the header, I can install this. And now it's got some options. We can put in the values. If any of you have used OneTrust, they use a series of cookie value numbers to determine what particular services ought to use. We can save that. And now we'll see that, first of all, I have this listed in my installed, and my library now says, oh, I got to rebuild because we added something new. Similarly, whenever you look in something like Adobe Analytics, you're going to see all of your Adobe Analytics configuration options in here. So all of the bits and bobs that you're used to seeing in your base configuration. One thing to call out immediately, and we'll get back to them in a second, but wherever you see this little 3 stacks icon, that is a data element. So you can have a dynamic value go into this field. This is really useful if you have an Adobe Analytics implementation that covers multiple sites or multiple report suites. So you can use programmatic at runtime logic to determine where your data is going to go. Should it go to my dev suite? Should it go to my staging suite? Should it go to prod? Should it go to prod A? Should it go to prod B? So on and so forth. You can make that as complex as you want or keep it as simple as you want in this particular case. And then I'm going to have Andy take a look at rules.
Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, I think what I learned the hard way is that the share screen thing, you'll have to make, that's going to be a weird thing. I'm so used to just taking it over. There we go. All right. So pulling up into rules. Rules are pretty much, the way I view them is they're kind of the most unique thing to launch that is different from like some more traditional like tag management systems where like GTM has tags and triggers. Rules are kind of a wonderful combination of the trigger, the tag, and conditions inside it, and you can have multiple ones. So let's just pull up the page load rule real quick. So there's a section called events, which is basically the equivalent for a trigger. And if you look at all this, you'll see kind of very neatly laid out events, conditions, actions. And it's broken out into a if, then. So if, when, then structure. So if you're familiar with coding logic, or some similar tools like IFT, like for home automations, any of those kind of things, similar kind of structure about laying out of what actually is the thing we're looking for that's going to start this whole process. What conditions you want to have as it's evaluated to see if it's something you, even if it fires, you want it to fire if there's additional conditions. And then what are going to be the actions, or these are equivalent to tags. So like things that are going to fire explicitly because of that. So right now we have, if we look at this existing one, DOM ready. And this is actually one of the built-in ones inside the core extension. If you look in the core extension, we can see that we have Adobe Client Data Layer and Experience Platform Web SDK installed currently, as Spencer was kind of showing in that extension view. So these kind of get inherited downstream into rules, which is really nice for kind of the extensibility of like launch. The more you install these extensions, the more options you'll see here. Obviously, the more extensions you install, the more weight you add. So be smart with what extensions you're installing and which ones you need. But this is kind of one of the big, huge like features in launch that kind of adds additional like structure and kind of scalability to your implementation. But right now, it's just a simple DOM ready. So this is kind of basically once the library is like ready to, like the library isn't fully loaded, the window isn't fully loaded, but it's able to start kind of reading the DOM, interacting with the DOM. We have no conditions on this rule, but you can add all kinds of conditions. And there's 2 breakouts of logic type. The first one is regular logic and the other one's exception. And they are pretty straightforward. Regular logic is just going to say this condition is going to evaluate and pass true if it meets all the conditions of your condition selected type. Whereas the exception is if this evaluates true and this condition is met, it actually is going to return back, don't fire this rule. And within the extensions, right now, we have 2 that actually can manage conditions. Talking about one trust management earlier, we can actually set up in here a rule for general cookies. If we wanted to have this page load rule only fire when functional cookies are active, we could put that variable configuration there right now for 3. Or if we wanted another strictly necessary, you can do this kind of layouts. And if you wanted it to not fire when that strictly necessary cookies is active, that you would configure as an exception. And if we did that, you'll see it says not. Obviously, I don't think there's many configurations where you want to do that situation. So probably more likely the inverse, which is regular. We would want to fire if strictly necessary cookies are active. But for this purpose, not really needing any condition there. And then we go into the actions, which similar kind of structure and layout. You can pick from the extension. We have a lot of options here. So of all the extensions we configured, but we'll look at the ones that are configured for this rule right now. We have a set variables call, which hooks into the Adobe Analytics extension. We have an evar1 being set for geometric shape PDP, which I think at this point, I don't believe we've had the fun to introduce our site for this. So this site right now is one we've kind of spun up to kind of like facilitate this kind of demo today. If we refresh the page, you can actually see we see some stuff firing currently, which is great. Means our launch script's on the site. And if we were to look at the page source, we'll see, yep, there it is right there. There's our launch library script. If we got the AP debugger, we could see the same thing. But we can see a lot of things are firing here, which is awesome. And we can see this page rule is firing. On that note, if you're ever curious about trying to understand what your site's doing and if the rules are behaving, satellite set debug true is your friend, because it is going to give you a lot of information that's not visible to most people out of the box, but we can kind of see what rules are firing. And you can also search for the launch icon, and it'll let you know exactly what's triggering from launch. So we can see that page load rule is firing, page bottom rule is firing, and what else is firing? The G tag event is firing as well. So really good information to know on that. And inside the set variables call, there's also a custom code editor section where we have some logic being placed in here for products, which I won't spoil too much because I know Spencer's got some more fun stuff that later. But it allows for setting all these up and then setting our beacon. So these are broken out like into the actual set variables call and one that actually sends the beacon out, and we see it's being treated as a page view. A lot of things you can do with a rule and a lot of flexibility. The one thing I will caution, because it's so flexible, there are a million different ways to do things. There are a million different types of things you can put inside a rule. You can put functional things in rules. It could run JavaScript. You could put custom code blocks in there. So with all of that, this rule is probably a great example of like a naming convention we wouldn't want to use. Page load rule can mean a lot of different things. We'll dive into more best naming practices later, but definitely be cognizant if you're putting a lot of rules in a library. It might make sense for there's only 5 or 6 of them, but the second when you get to like 30, 40, or in some cases I've seen as many as like a couple hundred, 700, 800 rules in a library, it gets really hard to follow what's happening in a library at any given point. So I would strongly recommend figuring out a naming convention and utilizing it, and we'll dive into some of those a little bit later. But other than that, I think we'll dive now into data elements. I'll pass it back over to Spencer. Oh, actually, while Spencer, you're pulling it up, is there a limited number of actions that can fire when a single rule is triggered? I don't think there's a technical theoretical limit. That being said, what you might notice, like when we were looking at the rules, there was wait then. One of the updates launches made by default to the newest, I want to say made in 2020, I believe, was running out the running rule components in sequence. And what can happen is once you put like 10 or so actions in there, there is some like descript time where you have to wait for the other one to previously fire. Then you run to I think by default it's 2000 milliseconds. So if you go on to one single rule and you like throw 40, 50 actions in there, I think the most I've seen where I started seeing performance issues, I had a rule that worked at First Financial Bank that was basically a media pixel evaluator rule that went through, I think, like 20 actions. And we started seeing some of the like pixels dropping off around like 17, 18. So we put priority pixels in front of it. But the more you put in a rule, the more fragile the rule is. And if you're doing weight bend logic, the more you kind of nest into that, the more fragility is set up. So while there's not, I don't know the theoretical limit, and I've never personally hit it, I'm sure we could probably figure it out. If you're running into that kind of question, the answer probably you should just break it out.
Yeah, I would say similarly. I've seen rules with 20 to 25 actions on them have some delay, but not a meaningful or necessarily concerning delay. The only time I would want to be really aware of it is if it's on a rule that's triggered on page navigation, because if it is, you're either canceling the navigation and creating a perceptible delay to your site users, which is bad, or you're not going to get all of your media pixels fired off before the navigation happens. So those would be situations where you'd want to consider some means of saying, I want to trigger these on the next page load, or I want to figure out some strategy to work with my media team to lower the overall load of triggers that happens around the time a navigation event happens. So talking about data elements. Data elements are your variables. These are things that you can create as reference to yourself and for other people working in your launch container that allow you to have logic or references to environment, fixed variables, or transformations that everyone can reference and use without having to recreate or rewrite that code over and over and over again, especially because that allows for error to creep in where two different people have done something slightly differently and you end up with close but not the same values. The three main categories, I think, of data elements you're going to see are fixed, direct references, and variable. So a fixed one is one that you don't even have to worry about the value because it's being provided by an extension. So I'm looking at the data elements interface here. You'll see I have launch environment level. And when I drill into this, it's being provided by the core extension as opposed to those other extensions that we previously talked about and seeing here. And this one is the runtime environment. So it's going to just tell me something about the runtime environment that is the satellite object on the page. You can access this via JavaScript, but why do that when you have something that you know is going to be maintained and is always going to return a good value to you, as opposed to writing JavaScript that might arbitrarily someday have a problem because the way the underlying code works has changed. So this says environment stage. So this is going to always return to me development, staging, or production. There might be some time where you want to write a jig tool that allows you to do testing in a development environment, but you never want it to reach the production environment, or if it does reach the production environment, you want to ensure that it never runs. This would be a way that you'd be able to flag that. The next sort of data element that you're frequently going to see is one that is variable based on something that you see in the environment. So something like this. This reads a query string, and it is looking specifically for the CID, and this checkbox says I could be capital C, capital I, whatever. That means that this data element is only going to return a value when the CID parameter exists in the current page's query string. Now you will see there are some other options here on the left-hand side as my page reloads. Enable default value. So this is a way to say, hey, if my value, if this doesn't evaluate to anything, I want to return a default value, basically a if all else case. I want to force the lowercase value. That's pretty straightforward. We're just driving everything down into lowercase. And then clean text tries to remove encoding and leading and trailing white spaces so that you can have a consistent value across all of your data collection so that you don't end up in a case where you have some values with %20 and some values without. The last option you see down here is storage duration, which is none. Only give me this value the moment that I call this and then throw it away. Page view, remember this until navigation, real navigation happens. So not a document unload and a document load. Session, remember for whatever 30 minutes session or rolling time frame is. And then visitor, assign this to the visitor and try and remember it. Obviously, you're going to be at the mercy of your browser in terms of these longer durations. So if the browser is blocking that, you might see that those values don't get held on as long as you want. But that is where those are. They are still existing on the client computer, not being stored in the cloud anywhere. The last kind of data element that is relevant is one that takes contextual data that you send to it. These are especially useful for transformations. You'll see I have two up here at the top. These are product values. So one thing that I frequently see is my front end teams, when they want to send me product data, it almost always is coming out of some sort of product database that they have access to. And that's never, ever in a format that is useful for any of the platforms that I'm going to be working with. So you'll get something that looks like this. So it's a JSON object. It's got a SKU, it's got a name, it's got a price, maybe it has tax, maybe it has product codes, it's got variant information. But that's not an object that any of our third-party remarketing tags are going to accept, nor is Adobe Analytics, because it's got a specific product string format. So what you'll see that I've done here is event.product. So this is the context when I attempt to retrieve this data element, I give it something, and that in this case is going to come back as this event object. I can run through all of these steps in this and return a specific value. Now, what you'll notice is that in my data elements, I have one for floodlights, but I also have one for the Adobe product string. And the output is different because those two platforms take different strings back. But in both cases, the input is the same. So I don't have to do any reformatting before my rules execute. All I have to do is just send the same context to both of those data elements. And when you look at that in a rule, you'll see here I have a carousel visibility, which you can see on the site when in a second when I modify the carousel's state. In here, I send my visible products as the products to be parsed, and that automatically gets stuffed into s.products. And in the same exact rule, I have an action for triggering gtag would be this, and I send the different product string the same exact object. So it's the same object both times. I only have to do that once, and I can do that anywhere on the site and always get the same values back. So when I come back to this and I turn on my debug, and I take my action, you'll see that I have my products right there. And everything came back the way that I wanted, despite me sending the data in this format. And then I will, that's it for the top level from data elements. They have a lot of complexity. You can use them in a lot of different places. As I said earlier, anywhere that you see that little barrel icon. So even when you're in here, if you're setting your props and your vars, you can dynamically pull in a data element, even from the event context itself again. So wherever you see it, it's going to be inside of these % signs, and that will dynamically pull in a value to whatever thing you have it assigned to. I'll let Andy talk a little bit about hosts.
Awesome, thanks, Spencer. And yeah, the data elements are like, I think one of the biggest pieces that really make launch like so just like extensible. I constantly, to the point you made about like, oh, everywhere you see data element picker, there are some situations where extension developers also don't make a data element picker available, but it does work. So something fun to play with if you're ever really bored and you're like, let's be really nice to just accept a data element. It might. Something to test out and see.
Yeah, you can, just as off the top of my head, you can manually set and retrieve them via JavaScript as well. Once you set via JavaScript, don't have a storage duration, so just be aware of that. But you can retrieve them that way, both in normal JavaScript and in HTML blocks assigned to rules.
Yes. Sometimes this can be the bane of your existence if you're trying to figure out, wait, what data element's not set? Oh, it was set. Yeah, it was set. Was set on the JavaScript side. Okay, that explains why that happened to that one. Yep. Dealt with a lot of those fun ones. So diving into host, by default, when you create your launch property, you're going to have, you're managed by Adobe Host. And these are basically being delivered via Akamai. I think it even shows that in the type, Akamai. And this is this is a fancy way of saying is, hey, I want to let Adobe manage my libraries for me. So as we kind of were reviewing that library earlier, we were looking on page, we see this assets.adobedtm.com/extensions. We see these are all kind of originating from that. If we look at the page source, actually look at the sources in general, and we look at what's coming from assets.adobe.com, dtm.co.com. This is pretty much all of our launch library loading from right here. So it's just basically just a fancy way of saying this. And by that, we get out of the box production, development, staging environments. Now, you also have the ability to add another type of host, which is an SFTP host. And what this allows is if you need for your like security reasons, like there's many different reasons. One could be security. You want to make sure that only can be loaded explicitly on your environment, sometimes in financial sector, banking sector, or if you're dealing with like HIPAA compliance, there can be some stuff where you want to make sure that you have full control of the library and that loads via SFTP. And you can kind of go the route of setting up the SFTP server URL. This also allows you to deliver from your domain explicitly. So it doesn't have the assets.wdtm.com anymore. It'll have like /vendor/launch if you wanted to, or you could rename it something else. It ultimately loads the same script that kind of deploys from launch. Like when you build a library and you deploy, it's the same type of script. It's just utilizing the SFTP for delivery. And you will also get a dev, prod, and staging environment when you configure a SFTP host. It can allow for, you could do this for, and the reason why you can do as many of these as you want is you could do this for, if you say you had like multiple sites, as Spencer was mentioning earlier, you might have ones for each domain if you wanted to have it delivered for each domain. The other big benefit of it too is it kind of gives a little bit of stability if whether there's ever an Akamai outage or other kind of issue that it would impact the Adobe managed scripts, you could utilize the scripts here. The one big disadvantage that I think some people might not be aware of is the three-dot menu. I don't think we're going to have to go through anything more that we will have to build this on. Actually, no, I'll wait to build this just yet. But once I submit this development, we go through the process and we publish it. In the three-dot menu, you have an option for Adobe managed scripts to revert to previous publish, which is a really nice feature if, God forbid, you release a library and something catastrophic happens and you need a little more time to kind of work through what kind of caused that issue. You can revert that. You do not have that capability to do it for SFTP managed host. So one important caveat there of host, if you have that set up that way and are used to that, that might be a bit of a nasty surprise. You're not prepared for it. But I will pass over. I know you walked a little bit through consent management, Spencer, already, but I'll let you dive into a little bit more of those consent management options.
Yeah, so consent management obviously is a hot button topic for a lot of different platforms and a lot of different partners, depending on where the legal team falls at your given clients. There are a lot of different ways to get a consent management through launch. A lot of the extensions have built-in functionality, so I'll just highlight a couple of those real quick. You can see in the Adobe Analytics in general, enable EU compliance for Adobe Analytics. So this does require you to have a sat_track cookie, I believe with a value of 1 or true in it. It's been a hot minute since I had to deal with that. It's definitely in the documentation. It's one of those two values. And then you could save that. And then once you've done that, the Adobe Analytics extension will simply, I think it's probably s.aborting. It stops before it sends the data. So it will build the beacon, but it doesn't send it whenever you try and do it. And it's not just on first hit, it is on all of your subsequent hits until that cookie exists. You'll see that in the eSID service as well. You have the enable opt-in status, and you can use yes, no. There's a function. So if you have, and you can see your data layer picker here. So if you have a function that says, oh, some of my sites, like if I have an EU site and I have a US site, when I'm on the EU site, I have to ask for GDPR compliance. In the US, I don't have to do that. So that will determine whether or not I'm going to do this. And then your other long-term storages. Similarly, in WebSDK, as you're moving forward into the AEP world, you will also see the opt status right here that you can use either from a data element in or out. Now, that's at the extension level. You also see, as I talked about earlier, we have OneTrust right here. You can then, at a rule level, as Andy was showing, add in this sort of compliance tracking by choosing that extension and saying, are these active? and you'll see green for approved, red for exceptions. This does also work with any kind of content platform where you could use just a value comparison here. So you could use a data element, say one that reads the OneTrust cookie groups, and say, is 3 in there? So this is the same as the OneTrust extension, only I'm doing it manually. You can imagine that there might be other platforms that don't have an extension that are tied into Adobe Launch, where you would do something along these lines. Typically, I prefer using the extension, as I said earlier, because it provides a clearer visual cue to you as the developer in Adobe Launch. But sometimes, you don't have the tool. Also, you always want to rename your internal components so that you know what that is. And then both of these things are the same. So obviously when one evaluates to true, the other should evaluate to true as well. And I think that is it for consent. It is one reason you might do it that way rather than doing it with the extension is a lot of times I see site analytics as considered functional required and remarketing tagging as considered optional. So you have a lot of times where you've separated your rules so that your remarketing tags are in one rule and your site analytics tags are in another rule, and you don't want to stop everything at a top level. You want to stop it on a rule by rule basis so you can block them out that way.
I think it's a good segue into some of the best practices, like such as naming conventions, and just the way you structure this. Because the biggest thing that I think is an important call out is that there's going to be it's a different tool for each job. You don't want to come for a hammer with like you don't want to go with a hammer if you use a screwdriver. And there's going to be situations where there's the extension's the best way of doing it, but you might need more fine-tuned control, or you might need some situations. Or it's the point Spencer made out, which is one that honestly I've kind of forgotten a couple times, where it's kind of bitten me, where I've set up kind of things to daisy chain off of a rule, not realizing, oh yeah, well there might be compliance things where I don't want the daisy chain and bypass consent stuff if there's any like different groups of cookies that are happening all via launch. So one of the big things is naming conventions are going to be your best friend. There's been a lot of cool rollout with the search, be able to kind of search for like, oh, I know this is setting EVAR 1, and it can spit things out, which is great. But right now we just see it's Adobe Analytics set variables, which if you're using default names for stuff, it's going to come through a lot that way. The other one is right now it's pretty easy with this amount of rules, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rules. God forbid I don't know where something's at. I can check each of these 6 rules and figure it out. But if we start looking at this and we had to do this for like, say, 20 or 30 rules, and I'm diving into custom code, diving into other kind of like, and then I see like there's reference data elements, I have to go into those, it gets a little bit crazy real quick. So one of the things I'd recommend that I really like to do with like rules in general is to kind of like set up the concept of like laying out, a direct call rule to let me know what type of events triggering it, and then kind of let me know if there's any conditions applied to it with scope, what extension might be used as part of the rule, and then to also give me an insight of what is being set into it. So there's actually 2 different naming conventions here, which is actually another great thing I'd like to call out, is that there's no wrong naming convention unless it doesn't work for you. The naming convention that serves you best is the one that's going to be the most valuable. For example, for this one, I kind of laid out something with data elements where we had this kind of structure of like, oh, it's a core extension, it's a query string parameter, and here's the value of the name. Whereas I've had those instances, libraries where I've used like a layout of, okay, with the rules, I want it to tell me like how Spencer's laid out here of like strict call rule, and I'm setting both Adobe Analytics and Floodlight, and using kind of the parentheses one. I think that's one that I know that has been modeled. I've seen modeled that Jim Gordon, I think in one of the links I shared out, has kind of some recommendations on that. But the biggest piece is knowing what your structure is and knowing that you can find what you need to find quickly. I personally like this better than the folder structure in Google Tag Manager because it's so easy to kind of put a bunch of stuff in a folder. It's not named properly and then rely on that. And it just kind of creates its depths of layers you can't quickly search. Whereas if you know exactly what type of rules you have and what extensions you're using with these rules, which I did kind of for these data element systems ones, I know that if I remove this extension later, because I'm like, I want to get the library size down, I know what data elements at a quick glance I can say, oh, what all data elements are going to be impacted if I do this? Okay, it's just these two. Whereas if for some reason I wanted to try to remove core, I don't know why I would do that, but in case I was crazy and decided I was just going to do something absolutely insane for the heck of it, I would know that it's going to impact 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10. Perfect. It would impact 10 data elements right now. Probably be a lot more in an actual production environment. The other piece is library naming. When you get a lot of libraries in here, you can actually search historically for libraries based on names. Generally, I like to use naming conventions that make sense or can be keyed off of something at a later date. So if you're working in a system that has ticket IDs or something of that nature, really good to, like, if I can just pull a JIRA ID, like JIRA 53, and I know what library released of that. So it's really good to know at what day something released for historical naming, and also for uniqueness of naming, because the last thing you want is initial build, revision, initial build, final, making it to your published environment, which does happen. But is a really beneficial way to kind of like better structure these libraries and know exactly what's in them at a glance. And then with that structure of everything, talking about like there's a layout of things should be modular in launch. The most modular you can make them is the best to kind of like ensure stability. Like you can do and I've seen environments where you can manage like your entire product string in one data element in 6,000 lines of code. It is doable. There are production organizations that have done this and have done this for a while and converted over to 3,000. It was a huge improvement over the existing one. But what happens is you do a mistake like I did, where I put a semicolon in the wrong place in that product string, and I break orders for a span of like 2 hours, and it costs us like millions of dollars potentially in lost revenue attribution. So the point of that is, if it is a data element and you make a mistake, it breaks the data element, nothing else. Whereas if you put it in your rules and your rule fails, everything downstream could fail. So use that modular structure to your advantage. It's the best layout, and you have the ability to do it. And on that note of that last piece, before I like jump into the media pixel configuration use case that Spencer was really cool. The last piece I'll say is you can absolutely layer into a single rule so much. Like you can go into a rule, you could add clear variables, you can set variables, you can decide, you know what, I don't want to make a custom code of objects, I want to put it directly in here. This is all analytics related, but I could have it say, oh, grab this variable, do this, set some functional things in the data layer. And I've seen organizations do that, and then they'll throw another custom code directly in the action right here. And they'll execute it globally, and they'll set some window objects, and it's good to go in their mind. The problem you run into that is this is very complex. It makes it hard to find this kind of nested stuff inside rules, what might also be available in data elements. And generally, people like to do it because they think it's cool, but avoid complexity when it's not needed. You're going to need to use complexity at some point to solve some business requirement problem, and it's going to come later. And I think the keep it simple, like a KISS methodology, or less politely known as keep it simple stupid, is a really important one that we can fall guilty to if we aren't thinking, if we try to get too ornate with our solutions and try to over-engineer things, there'll be complexity added. Keep it as simple as you possibly can, because the business requirements will eventually add complexity. But yeah, I'll hand over to Spencer to walk through his media pixel use case.
Yeah, so probably one of the most common requests that I see is when we already have an action on the site and someone says, I want to add a new remarketing tag to that action on the site, be that a new floodlight, a new AdWords tag, a new whoever pixel. So I want to get the requirements from all of that, first of all. And like I said previously, is there an extension that covers this partner that we're handling? Or am I going to have to take the code that is being handed to me and insert that into a custom code block? The next consideration I have, again, talking about consent management, is does this go in the same rule that my other action does, or is it going to go into its own rule? So for instance, let's say my media team comes to me and says, hey, we want to add a new floodlight on to add to cart. And I know that my site has consent management or is likely to have consent management in the future. So I want to have a second rule. I can come into my launch container. I see I have add to cart. I'm going to go ahead and create a copy in this container. Go ahead and I've created the copy there. You'll see it comes up right here. And now I'm going to do this. I'm going to rename it so that I know that this is the floodlight. I'm going to clear out the Adobe actions, so I'm not sending those twice. I'm going to add in my OneTrust, and I'm going to say these are targeting cookies. These have to be active. And I'm going to say that. So now I know that I have my consent conditions correctly for the future. Now I have two options here based on the extensions that I have installed, and I'll show you both. So first, let's say I know it's a G tag, so it's a floodlight or an AdWords, and I'm going to send an event, and I'm going to just say this is add to, I'm going to say item sold, because that's what I have written elsewhere. Item sold is the event action name, and then I can choose which floodlights and conversions for AdWords in here that I wanted to use. That's fine. If I have an additional field, I'm going to say U7 equals, and now this is where it's going to get a little funky. I am going to do this. And in this case, I would need to have, this interface does not provide a good means to provide context, and this one requires context. So I would need to have a version of this that reads the page. I'm going to just leave this for right now rather than having to reconfigure that. But that's how I would use an extension to do this. So that's one way of getting at this. If I didn't have an extension that I could use, I would come in here and I would do custom code. I almost always try and do JavaScript here as opposed to HTML, because HTML creates a frame or appends to the bottom of the document, depending on when the rule is executing. And that can cause complications with the way some pixels, frequently they want access to the host window object. You'll see that when you're testing it. Come in here, and I'm going to just paste my G tag call, and I have my conversion, and I have my, am I missing a parentheses here? Oh, yes, because it should do that because it's in a JSON object. I set the same U7 that I was setting before to what I wanted it to be, and now that'll come out there as opposed to coming from an extension. I do want to rename this. I don't want to just call it core custom code. I usually will do something like this. The values you're used to seeing in whatever your remarketing tag is. This is going to vary depending on what the platform is, but I want to let myself know in the future, these are the values that are associated with this, and then I set it to a dynamic value. Having these in here will save you when you go to use the component search, because your media team can provide you and say, hey, this activity is the one we're having trouble with. Here's the parameters, and you can search for that action type, or the type value, and almost always drill immediately into the rule that you need to modify or examine to know what is going on. And then once you have this all saved and added to your library right there, you would go ahead and build. And now you would be able to move to your development environment and test, when I take this action, do I see both of these rules fire?
Awesome. Thanks, Spencer. No, that's super helpful to be able to find that. There's been so many times where it's like, oh yeah, what's going on with this pixel? I'm like, which one? Like, oh, just, this, like, this Google Floodlight one. I'm like, cool. There's like 15 of those. Do we know a specific campaign or thing we're focusing on? Yeah, it's something with this, like, they give me an ID, and I'm like, okay, well, unfortunately, that's not searchable with the way it's configured right now.
Yeah, with Floodlight, I will say you'll especially get bit because the activity ID that comes out of Campaign Manager does not exist in the actual pixel that goes on the site. So I try and include that in that title usually, just so that the media teams, when they come back and say it's this activity, I can search for that and find where my problem is.
So I'm going to build this library to staging real quick. Actually, I meant to build it to prod. We'll do that real quick. general advice, one actual important thing I want to call out, because I've been bitten by this before, and something that makes sense, but I didn't think about it in the context of library releases. You always want to build to each environment that's actually an environment in your production flow. So you have a dev environment and a stage environment and a prod environment. You want to build, you can choose to build this directly to production from the get-go, like from development, which is fine if you only have a development and a production environment. But if you have a stage environment and you go build to production, what's going to happen is it's never going to actually build to your dev, your stage environment. It'll build to your dev, it will skip stage, and it'll go to prod. And if you have anything you're QAing in stage and you build something in dev and you kind of look into your stage environment, you're not going to see it fire anything library-wise with that prod environment you went live, because it actually skips the build, which we found out like it makes sense because you never actually build it to your stage environment, but can be a real pain for trying to debug something later. So with that, I'm going to talk about something that I think a lot of us have dealt with before, which is campaign tracking or UTM parameters. And I think one of the coolest things that is like capable of Adobe is that you can utilize anything for them, like for your tracking code, but it's also one of your biggest like pain points, because a lot of people are so used to this the limitation that exists with UTM parameters that it's kind of been adopted by like most like media organizations. So let's say we've got the CID right here, and someone sends through correctly. Let's say your tracking code is source, medium, campaign, term, and content. Let's keep it simple right now that it's going to have the exact same parameters as a UTM parameter, but you're passing it through the CID parameter, and we're not changing anything special. We see everything works as expected. I go to my page view call, and I look at my campaign code, which is evar0, source, medium, campaign, term, content, and then we have our little ending tilde to help us know that's the end of the marketing code, and that's what our tracking code should be. And it'll go into our proper marketing channel configuration, and everything is great. Now, what happens is that somebody is like, you know what? I'm just going to add UTM parameters to that, and I'm going to drive you to the website. But now, because they've used the UTM parameters, we don't have anything for tracking code right now, which is not great, because, well, we need that. We want to understand that. Now, you can go into marketing channels and you can kind of do some fun stuff there to try to handle that. But what happens when this breaks again with somebody else? You can actually set up a fallback rule. And this is something I've done. Environments where UTM parameters come up a lot, and there's a pretty one-for-one equivalent. And we did this kind of like, it looks a lot more complicated than it really is. A lot of these are things you would already have. For example, this is your CID query string parameter, which is already live. But then we also set up like our UTM parameters for all the different like breakouts: campaign, content, medium, source, and term. And then we also have, go back to that build. We have the core extension, which is already live. We can actually remove that from the build because that's live now. So let's delete those real quick. Throw it to a dev library. Let's save and build it there. So that's building right now. While it's building, though, with the rest of them, so we have all of our like the existing query string parameters. What was unique for us in this case is that if we look at the Adobe Analytics extension that was prior to the one that's live right now, let's go to the live revision. We can see that it's currently using global variables, the CID one. So we have no support for UTM parameters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a data extension called the Data Element Assistant that's built by Analytics. And what it allows for is it allows for two data element types that are going to be really beneficial to us. One of them being a concatenation data element type. So this actually allows us to say, hey, I want to take all these UTM parameters and lay them out and structure them the exact same way that I would expect my CID to set them with our trailing delimiter and our breakouts. So we can generate sample output. We can see that that's passing as we expect. It's a little bit cut off, but we can see that that's laying out the way we expect with the pipe breaks. You can also set up emit of empty, return empty when no values found. Lots of cool things you can do with that. And then what the other thing I'm going to set up is explicitly a sequence data element, which is going to kind of just do a nice little bit of a if-then logic, but put it directly into the UI as opposed to having it go through like an if-end statement in a custom code or otherwise. And we're going to say, ideally, we want our CID to be the source of truth. We want people to set the CID correct. But if they don't have it and we have UTMs, let's grab that instead. And let's grab this concatenated one. We build this to dev. And now this thing that wasn't collecting anything for tracking code previously, we'll refresh it. Might have to clear cache. We'll see. There we go. I've changed nothing in the URL. It's still the UTM source equals source, medium, campaign, and so forth. But it is now properly formatted as we'd expect it to. So we have a fallback now for this, which is a really neat thing to have in an environment where UTM parameters are also in play. And I think that gets us right up to the end of our planned content. I know I put a message in the chat earlier if there's any questions that we haven't covered yet or anything we have to dive into deeper. But yeah, open it up to the group if there's anything else we'd like to cover in our brief remaining time.
Yeah, we're more or less out of time, but if anybody does have a quick question, please throw it in the chat. Otherwise, I didn't share it, but I'm sure everybody on the call would be happy with a LinkedIn connection. If you guys want to, if anybody wants to reach out, Andy Spencer, I'm sure would love a few more followers on LinkedIn. That's always good for personal brands, I guess. But yeah, anything, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Them more than me. They know more about this particular topic than I do. But yeah, just reach out on LinkedIn, and thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks everybody for having us.
Yeah, thank you.